So, greetings. I'm to speak about the Bhagavat Gita, a text that I've been studying for more than 60 years. And I'm happy to share with you some of the things I discovered when compiling my own translation after being inspired for so many years by Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavat Gita as it is. And, well, I have some special things to share. Why are they special? Well, part of, I think, being a disciple of Srila Prabhupada has been the ability and the sort of empowered feeling of being able to delve more deeply into bhakti texts in a way that I wouldn't have been able to without Prabhupada's grace. So, let me start by telling you that the Bhagavad Gita is one of the three most sacred texts of the world, the most read and beloved sacred texts of the world. The Bible has 31,102 verses. The Quran has 6,236 verses. And our Bhagavad Gita, only 700 verses. Can you imagine? Only 700 verses. Amazing. But these verses are very, very deep, and each verse is a window into the deepest spiritual knowledge of the self and the supreme. So, but the Gita is so different. It opens up very differently than the other sacred texts that we just mentioned. The Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, the Quran. And let me just give you a little taste of that. The book of Genesis opens up, in the beginning was when God created the heavens and the earth. So right away, you know it's a scripture. In the Gospel of Mark, the first of the four gospel writers, he writes, in the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then the Quran, glory to Allah, Most High, full of grace and mercy. He created all, including man. These scriptures are beautiful. They're eloquent in their language, in the original languages in which they were written, and they front load divinity. They tell you immediately who divinity is, what divinity is doing, what he has bestowed out of his grace, and so on. The Bhagavad Gita does not sound like a scripture. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yoyotsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakuravata sanjaya. On the field of Dharma, on the field of Kuru, assembled together desiring to fight were my armies, and indeed those of the sons of Pandu. How did they act, O Sanjaya? So here is a minister listening to his king inquire what is happening on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The Gita is opening up with a battle. Okay, we don't have any knowledge of Krishna. We don't know what God's immense powers and creative forces are about. We don't know much about his blessings. We don't know his name. We don't know anything from this first verse. Amazing. Well, let me insist on this, that the beauty of the Gita lies not in the front loading of divinity and its identity and its powers, but the Gita really speaks to something more universal, the human condition. We all have our own battlefields. We all are, Arjunas, and we're all like the blind king. We're like blind kings in false kingdoms. We think we're going to be here forever. We think that this is all there is. And that's the nature of the king inquiring in the first verse. So we're here to try to identify ourselves in the conditioned state in which we actually exist. And so the Gita really begins with the human condition, which goes beyond particular and specific identities of divinity. As beautiful as those scriptures are, the Gita begins with the human condition. So the first step of the Gita is knowing the human condition. This is what the Gita wishes us to be cognizant of. Because you can't transcend that which you're not aware of in the first place. So that is the first verse. And in fact, it's so beautiful. Dharma kshetre, on the field of dharma, that is to say, our inner spiritual nature, our inner permanent spiritual nature, and on the field of Kuru, Kuru being the dynasty from which the armies on the battlefield come, and that's the outer conditioned nature in which we find ourselves. So they come together, samaveta yoyotsavaha, in conflict. Our inner spiritual nature and our outer conditioned nature, they come together in conflict. So the Gita wishes us to understand this conflict. We can't solve that conflict if we don't know that the conflict is there. So immediately the Gita wastes no time in revealing to us what the conflict is. Yoga is the uniting of our outer conditioned nature with our inner spiritual nature. Harmonizing those two is what ultimately Arjuna experiences from Krishna's teachings. So, right in the first few words, the first 6 words of the Gita, we're immediately made aware of the human condition. This is very powerful. Okay, so, in the interest of time, I will simply say that the Gita begins with Arjuna, the great warrior, the great Pandava warrior, on the righteous side of the battlefield, has a major breakdown. And again, this just brings home very sharply the human condition. Arjuna's breakdown can be seen as an event of weakness. But actually, Arjuna was very, very brave and courageous, not as a warrior yet, but as a human who was able to come to terms with the fact that the world in which he was living presented an irresolvable conflict for him. He didn't know whether to fight or to not fight. Of course, every warrior is ready to fight vigorously. They're trained to do that. They love doing it. It's their nature. It's their calling. It's their dharma. On the other hand, he was there, of course, to protect innocent people. But on the other hand, he saw on the opposing opposing army on the battlefield, people he loved and honored, his friends, his teachers, his relatives. So he even went through so many, emotional moments with Krishna on the chariot, who was driving his chariot. But Krishna's very unassuming. The reader doesn't know exactly who Krishna is yet, at least not in the fullness of his divinity that we understand later in the teachings. So Arjuna spends 22 verses in the latter half of the chapter explaining how he can't do this. I can't fight, but I have to fight. I have to protect the people, but innocent people. But I can't kill people I love. So, on the one hand, Dharma Shastra says that you have to follow your own swadharma, your own nature, your own sort of proclivities in life. In fact, we can't help but do that. On the other hand, you can't kill people you love. So by the end of the 22 verses he spoke, dumping the contents of his troubled heart onto Krishna, he collapses in his chariot. And he has the symptoms of a traumatized, depressed individual. And he just threw his bow down, arrows went down, he sat down in his chariot, and he was just miserable. And that's how the Gita opens up. It opens up with a traumatized individual. But that trauma, if we look deep enough, is the trauma that we all share. We're in a world with so much beauty and so much worth living for. And on the other hand, there's so much horror and ugliness and just terrible things in this world. And even as fortunate and as privileged as so many of us are, if we become sensitive individuals, we will not overlook all of the suffering in the world, and frankly, all the suffering that is due us at one time or another in our lives. So, it's real. The Gita makes us real right off the bat. And we only learn about divinity 4 chapters in, the 4th chapter. Krishna says hardly anything during those 22 verses where Arjuna is just dumping the contents of his heart. Krishna just says 5 words. He's a really good listener. What ultimately Krishna does is he takes Arjuna through a process of purification. So first there is the knowing of the human condition. Really, the Gita consists of 4 major kind of events, you could say. And the first is awakening, or a knowing of the human condition. Then, in the 2nd chapter in the beginning, Krishna begins to, Arjuna turns to Krishna. Says, I need your help. I need to hear from you. And it's at that point where the relationship shifts between being a charioteer to a general, Arjuna, a general, and from a friend to a confidant, Krishna being the confidant, on whom the contents of his troubled heart was dumped. In the 2nd chapter, it turns into a relationship of disciple to teacher. And this is a very significant turning point. In chapter 2, verse 7, he says, Shishyas te shadimam aham prapanam. I am your student. Please instruct me. I submit myself unto you. Honestly, I wish most of my university students would say the same to me. They don't quite have the Arjuna spirit that is exhibited in the Gita. But yes, Arjuna gave himself complete. This was his only option. Well, you know what? He had other options. He could have pretended to not have any problems, go ahead and fight the war, and then probably, due to subconscious pullings, probably would have failed miserably, and things would have been disastrous. As Krishna himself asks in a rhetorical question to Arjuna later on in the Gita, what can repression accomplish? Obviously, what Krishna is saying is that it can be very destructive if we repress these feelings. So Arjuna's strength is as a warrior, yes, but Arjuna's strength in the Gita is in his ability to be self-honest, self-knowledgeable, self-realized that I have a problem. And now he turns to Krishna. So the first part of the Gita really is about knowing the human condition. Amazingly, most humans don't really grasp the human condition in which they find themselves. So that's the first thing. In chapter 2, we enter into the 2nd phase, which is an awakening of the heart. An awakening of the heart. And this is where Krishna takes Arjuna on a journey through various philosophical discourses. Arjuna is apprised of the intricacies of palatyaga, the renunciation of the fruits of actions, and how to offer that to the divine. He's taken through the various science of action itself, the nature of action and non-action or inaction. He's taken through the philosophy of yoga, the Patanjala yoga system, the Ashtanga system. That's in chapter 6. He's taken through so many different processes. And but woven throughout all of these discourses is Krishna speaking to Arjuna, come to me. Come to me. Another message is that you are dearly loved by me. Many times he says this. Over 22 times he's preoccupied with the idea of souls coming to him. So Krishna is known as the divinity who plays the flute, right? This is the only Bharatanatyam I know how to do. Don't worry, I'm not going to dance for you tonight. So the flute. He's known to send out a love call with his supremely beloved Radha. They stand side by side with an outward gaze while Krishna plays the flute. And this is both of them calling us to their hearts. But in the Gita, there's no flute. But the same energy of the love call is there with his teachings. That is his love call. And when you read the Bhagavad Gita, yes, read about yoga. Yes, read about Sankhya philosophy. Yes, read about the Mimamsa, aspects of action and non-action and so on. Yes, read about all of these things. Read about the Vedas. Read about worshiping demigods. Read about the Vishwarupa, the universal form. Read about all these things. Read about the Trigunya, the three modes of nature, as Prabhupada translates it, the modalities of forces that conduct the nature of things in this world. Read about those, yes. But beyond all of those things, Krishna is weaving in and out the message, the love call. Please come to me. Please come to me. Over and over. So, what I want to do is take you to what is the ultimate message of the Gita. This is where we can bring this little talk. Before I do, I should tell you that in the middle of the Gita, the 11th chapter, Krishna, displays his universal form. This powerful, mighty, scary, fascinating, beautiful form. I remember in the United States, when I was very young, I took a trip across the United States with a friend, and we went to the Grand Canyon. Now, some of you may not know about the Grand Canyon, but all this canyon in Arizona is a crevice in the earth. So you're going along, you're on flat ground, and suddenly you come to this great crevice, this geological phenomenon. And it goes down so deeply, and you see the horizontal strata of layers of earth going down, and it looks like you're looking into eternity. It's quite scary. And of course, as a foolish teenager, I stood on the edge of a rock. I wasn't in the railing area. I stood on the edge of a rock, looking down, and I thought I was looking into eternity. And I thought I might even be looking at my own death, because I'm standing on a rock that could crack, and there would be Garuda dust down in the depths of the canyon. So it was beautiful, but it was scary at the same time. And that could be very attractive. And Arjuna was dazzled by this form. Like good Indian chutney. Too hot to taste, but too sweet to resist. It's the same recipe, okay? Well, that chapter ends with Arjuna saying, would you please, okay, I've had enough of this too scary, like myself getting back from the rock on which I was standing inappropriately, without safety. So Arjuna asks Krishna, please, would you come back to that form that is so beautiful, this loving form that I experienced before? And Krishna said, yes, even this form is even more difficult to appreciate than the universal form you just experienced. So, in the end, Krishna takes Arjuna on a journey, ultimately culminating in the 18th chapter. And in the 18th chapter, Krishna describes the great secret, the greater secret, and the greatest secret of all. The first great secret is 49 verses. It's the bottom of the mountain, say. The greater secret is 14 verses, and the greatest secret of all is only 3 verses. The great secret has to do with dharma, acting out in the world, a calling of the heart into the world, relating your temporary activities to your eternal self. That's dharma. The second group of verses, the greater secret, is about realizing the true nature of the eternal self and Brahman. The self, the Atman, and the Brahman. And the third is the greatest secret of all. And that is where Krishna lays it down loud and clear, the calling. He says, Sarvaguyata Mambuya, Shrinu me paramang vachaha, ishtosi me dhritam iti, tato vikshami te hitam. My supreme, my greatest secret of all. Please hear again, because I've been hinting at this all throughout the Gita in these various teachings. It's kind of subtle and it's hidden, is what's implied here. The greatest secret of all, which is a superlative. It's not just the greatest secret, but the greatest secret of all. And then, to emphasize it even further, Shrinu Bhuya, Bhuya Shrinu. Here, you must hear this once again, finally. And if that weren't enough, Me Paramang Vachaha, my supreme message. He is shouting this out to Arjuna. Please, hear this. And then he puts it in quotation marks. Iti. Ishtosi me dhritam iti. You are so much loved by me. This is his ultimate message. You are so much loved by me. And that is the source of bhakti. That is why we engage in bhakti practices and a life of the heart within bhakti practices. We are responding to Krishna's love call. And that's the whole point of the Gita. Thank you for listening.